Hey everybody, so it's time for another 2021-2022 season preview, and today we're going back to the Western Conference and looking at the Calgary Flames, who certainly had some changes this offseason, but maybe not the huge changes that some people were expecting. No Johnny Gaudreau trade, no Sean Monahan trade, but there were definitely some adjustments to the lineup in Calgary this offseason, and we're going to see if that leads to a better year for them in 2021-2022 than they had this past season, where they missed the playoffs and were pretty disappointing. So before we get into it, I just ask you, please subscribe, hit that thumbs up. It helps out so much and is greatly appreciated. But let's get started. And before we look ahead, we need to take a look back on last year's Calgary Flames that went 26, 27, and 3. Good enough for 55 points and a 5th place finish in the North Division. They obviously did not make the playoffs because they didn't finish in the top 4. And it was a pretty disappointing year for Calgary after going out in the 2020 offseason and spending all this money on Jacob Markstrom and Chris Tanev. And they thought that they were going to have a playoff level team. And unfortunately, that was not the case. They only scored 2.77 goals for per game, which is pretty darn low and definitely a lot less than they were expecting. I mean, when you're a team that has, Johnny Gaudreau, Elias Lindholm, Matthew Tkachuk, Sean Monahan, when you have players like that, you're expecting to put the puck in the net, and they did not score very much last year. Offense was definitely an issue for them. Defensively, they weren't terrible. They weren't spectacular either. It definitely wasn't like top-of-the-line defense, but they gave up 2.86 goals against per game, which is probably pretty middle of the road, pretty average. They weren't a bad defensive team, but they weren't great either. I think the bigger issue was the lack of scoring. This team did not score enough goals last year. They want that goals for per game number to be a lot closer to 3, or ideally above 3, and it just wasn't last year. Special teams, power play wasn't great, 18.3%, below the 20% that I always look for. I think 20% is pretty much the benchmark of power play. If you're 20% or above, that's okay. You're okay. If you're below 20%, that's a bit of an issue. It wasn't terrible. It definitely wasn't as bad as New Jersey's power play or anything like that, but it definitely could be better. And penalty kill wise, it was 80.2% on the PK, which is kind of right on the line of being all right. Again, my number for that is 80% on the penalty kill. If you're 80% or higher, you're okay. If you're below 80%, that's somewhere that you want to improve, but they were like right on that 80 mark. So the PK was all right. And that kind of goes along with their offense and defense in general, like a little bit lacking on the offensive side of things last year, and not terrible defensively, but not great, but not, pretty middle of the road defensively. And that was kind of Calgary's season. Pretty middle of the road, very blah, very not good enough, but not like worst team not near the bottom of the league or anything like that, but not good enough. So they've made some changes this offseason after a pretty disappointing year last year. They've had quite a few additions and subtractions. As far as guys leaving, Mark Giordano gone off to Seattle. They lost their captain. Obviously, he's up there in age now, and it's not overly surprising that they were ready to move on. But he is gone and off to Seattle. So he was taken in the expansion draft. Forward Derek Ryan is no longer a Calgary Flame. Josh Levo is no longer a Calgary Flame. Joakim Nordstrom is gone. Goaltender Louis Domingue is gone, although he was a third goalie. Dominic Simone, depth forward, back in Pittsburgh. Probably won't see much NHL time unless there's injuries. And depth defenseman Nikita Nesterov gone as well. So they haven't really lost huge pieces other than Giordano, but they have had some depth guys gone. And as far as additions go, their big addition was Blake Coleman coming in from the Tampa Bay Lightning as a free agent. They gave him a huge contract, and he will be added into that forward group, and they're going to hope that he really boosts this forward group and gives them kind of an injection of life a little bit, especially into the middle six where they certainly need it. They also got traded for defenseman Nikita Zadorov from the Chicago Blackhawks, so they add Zadorov to the defense core. Forward Tyler Pitlick, they traded for. He got picked by Seattle and then traded to Calgary. Goaltender Dan Vladar they traded for. He comes in from Boston. After Boston signed Linus Ullmark in free agency, Vladar became expendable, and he comes in now to be the backup goaltender for Jacob Markstrom in Calgary. Veteran forward Trevor Lewis is now in Calgary. He signed. Veteran forward Brad Richardson signed. And veteran defenseman Eric Goodbranson is a Calgary Flame as well. That move was kind of had some people shaking their heads because Goodbranson hasn't exactly been great. But, you know, in a number 6 or number 7 role, I mean, he can be suitable, but definitely not high expectations for Goodbranson. But all in all here, obviously Coleman was kind of their big addition. Other than that, it was mostly depth guys, you know, some third, fourth line forwards, a couple of depth D-men and Zadorov and Goodbranson, and a backup goaltender. It wasn't like game-changing moves for the Calgary Flames, which some people thought we were going to see from them after, you know, how disappointing last year was. You know, there has been really so much talk over the past 2 or 3 seasons about a Johnny Gaudreau trade. That's never happened. Sean Monahan, there was a lot of trade talk about him, and that never happened. So they end up kind of bringing back a very similar team. So now we're going to take a look at my projected roster for the Calgary Flames this coming season, at least to start the year. And we'll take a look here. It's definitely an interesting group. Up front, you obviously, you know, the big names are all still there. Johnny Gaudreau, Matthew Tkachuk, Elias Lindholm, Sean Monahan, Michael Backlund, Milan Lucic, Blake Coleman, their big offseason addition, Andrew Mangiapane, Dylan Dubé, Tyler Pitlick, Brad Richardson, Trevor Lewis, and I think Brett Ritchie, as of right now, is probably going to be the 13th forward. There's not a lot of depth here in Calgary, and that's something we're going to talk about as this goes on, because there's definitely a lack of depth with this team. Moving on to the defensive side of things, we have Noah Hannafin, Rasmus Anderson, Chris Tanev, Juuso Vilimaki. I think that's your top 4 probably right there. Nikita Zadorov and Eric Goodbranson both brought in this offseason. I think those are both kind of bottom pair guys. And then Michael Stone, who is re-signed, is probably your 7th defenseman, although I do think Oliver Shillington could possibly take that spot from Stone. We'll talk about that when we get to depth. In goal, your goaltending tandem is Jacob Markstrom and Dan Vladar. And really, they don't have much beyond that. So they really, really need Jacob Markstrom to stay healthy this year, because they don't have much as far as goaltending goes beyond that. But now we're going to get to the depth side of things. And this is where things get pretty interesting for me, mostly because I really don't know what their depth is. I don't know who's in line for a call-up and who really isn't with this Calgary Flames team, because they don't have a lot of depth. They don't. You look at their roster for, you know, guys, their non-roster page that likely aren't going to make the NHL roster and will be playing down in the AHL. There's not a lot of guys with NHL experience. There's not a lot of, you know, highly touted prospects. They don't have highly touted guys that are like knocking on the NHL door. So it's kind of a bunch of names that are AHL level players, and I don't know which ones are going to get called up and which ones aren't. So the depth side of things was pretty hard to do for this, just because there's not much there. This team does not have a lot of depth. They don't have a lot of great depth at the NHL level. I mean, when you're talking about like Brad Richardson and Trevor Lewis and Brett Ritchie being, you know, in your lineup potentially, and you're talking about your bottom pair defense being Nikita Zadorov and Eric Goodbranson, you don't have a lot of depth. That's an issue. And then beyond their NHL roster, when you get down to AHL guys and prospects and stuff, there's really not much there either. Connor Zary is their best prospect. I don't think he's going to play in the NHL this year, though. That's why I left him off this list. He is their best prospect, but I still think he's at least a year away. I don't think he's going to be seeing NHL time this season. So beyond that, for forwards, I mean, you've got Byron Froese here. He's a veteran, very much a tweener, mostly an AHL guy throughout his career. But if you need a fourth liner, you can call him up. Jacob Pelletier is another one of their highly touted prospects. I would say Pelletier and Zary are their two best prospects. I think Zary's their best prospect, but Pelletier's also put up good numbers in junior, and I think he has a chance to possibly make this team. He's a year older than Zary. He's another year closer. So he's a guy that I definitely think could see NHL time this year and possibly take a spot from one of those veteran guys. Beyond that, I don't know, maybe Martin Pospisil. He got injured last year, but had shown signs of being a solid prospect. He's 21 years old now. Pretty physical guy, so if you need a bottom six forward, he's definitely a guy that could get a call up. If he can stay healthy, that will be important, obviously. But I don't know. There's not much there for depth. And again, you could add Connor Zary to this list. I just personally don't think he's going to be playing in the NHL this season. I think he needs one more year of development, and then you might see him crack the Flames lineup. But Pelletier, I guess, would probably be the best guy I could see making the lineup out of the gate. Defensively, you've got obviously Oliver Shillington, and like I said earlier, he could possibly take that seventh spot from Michael Stone. I don't think Stone's job is in any way guaranteed. I think Shillington could take that. Connor Mackey, I mean, he's another guy that probably will be a career tweener, but if you need a call up, he's there. Kevin Gravel, another guy I think pushing 30 years old, pretty much a career AHL guy who's played some NHL games. So if you do need a call up, if somebody gets injured, Gravel could be a call up, but there's just not much depth in general, like I've been saying with this team. Third goaltender, I assume, would be Adam Werner. He's only played a couple of NHL games, but he's got the best numbers out of the guys that they have to choose from. Because Tyler Parsons has been bad. His numbers are bad in the AHL, and Wolf, I don't think, is ready to be playing NHL games yet. So that would leave Adam Werner as your third goaltender. And like I said, they really better hope that Jacob Markstrom stays healthy this year, because they don't really have much as far as goaltending other than him. So Vladar is going to be the backup, and Werner, I guess, is your number three. And again, really no depth there either. So forwards, defense, goaltending, they really don't have good depth anywhere. And that's definitely something that could hurt this team if they start to have guys drop out of the lineup. It's not going to be good for them if that starts to happen. But Calgary, I mean, they're such like a middle of the road team. It's like, could they be a playoff team? I mean, they're in the Pacific Division, which is going to be really, really bad this year. So they could make the playoffs. If they do make the playoffs, I think it'd probably be one and done. But they could make the playoffs. I think they could very easily miss the playoffs like they did last year. They would really need good seasons from their top guys, because like I've been saying, they really have no depth. So they would need their top guys to have really, really good seasons to be a playoff team. Obviously, they would need Markstrom to be healthy all year and play at like last year in Vancouver, Jacob Markstrom. I don't know. I think they're going to be one of those like very middle of the road, mediocre, average teams that will probably, be either make the playoffs by a point or two, or miss the playoffs by like 5 or 6 points, somewhere in that range. And I don't know. It's going to be an interesting year for Calgary. There are pieces in place and things that I really like about this team, and then there are some things that I look at and I'm just scratching my head, like, what are they doing? Like, where's their defensive depth? Like, do you really think that rolling out Goodbranson and Zadorov on the bottom pair is going to work? I don't like the looks of that. Or even if you split them up, having them both in your top six, that's a problem. They don't have much goaltending beyond Markstrom. Vladar, I mean, as a Bruins fan, I've seen plenty of Vladar, and I like him. He's certainly not ready to be a starter yet, though. And then forward-wise, like, I mean, they need their top two lines to score so many goals because they're really not going to get much offense from their third or fourth line. So they would really need their second and first line to score a lot of goals. I just think there's a lot of problems with this team. There's definitely some things that I like, but there's also a lot of problems and questions with this team. So we'll see how it goes for Calgary. They do play in the Pacific, obviously, this year, and that's going to be a really bad division this year. So I wouldn't say that they don't have a chance or that they're not going to make the playoffs, because I think they could steal the third spot potentially, but I would not at all be surprised if they don't make it, and I probably will be predicting them to not make the playoffs this year. But that is my season preview for the Calgary Flames. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our merch store, memberships, and donation are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll talk to you guys soon.